In the dimly lit bar, the only source of light was a transparent crystal on the roof that had been applied the constant light spell. Through the crystal-covered light, you can see the rows of neatly arranged tables in this not very spacious bar, and most of them are full of people. The elf bard in white robes smiled. Elegantly pressing the silver wire of the harp, a light and relaxing modern music allows players to enjoy this moment of tranquility. Master, that barbarian is drunk again. It's already the 5th day, and he still has no money to pay the bill. A small humanoid creature with small horns and dark red skin covering its entire body, dragged a scorpion tail, flapped a pair of leather wings and flew to the bar to complain. Trundle, throw that renegade guy out, you won't be allowed in the future. A lazy female voice came from the bar. Okay, beautiful mistress. The ugly troll in a black tight vest put down the tray in his hand and walked out of the corner. I saw him looking in the direction of the wine table, grinning and grinning, licking his lips to reveal his ferocious fangs, then he hunched his back and walked forward with his arms swaying from side to side. 1 year. It's almost night, another world, has not returned, people. The drunken barbarian was very sloppy, and he was dragged by the strong troll without any resistance. His eyes were foggy and his face was numb. Muttering to himself. When the troll heard the words, he looked up at the roof in a daze. Has it been a year before he knew it? So fast. Then, without a trace, the inexplicable sadness in his eyes was hidden, and he whispered to the barbarian, people who can't see reality will eventually be eliminated, I'm sorry. The drinker next to him remained indifferent to the episode. Just took a glance, and then silently tasted the wine in the cup, enjoying the rare comfort. If you can't go back, just live on. Snapped. Gold coins slapped on the marble bar, making a crisp sound, breaking the relaxing atmosphere, and the drinkers looked at them with bad eyes. Boss, give me a cup of the bitterness of memories. It was a handsome man in elegant and decent clothes. He took out 2 gold coins and said to the bar owner. Then his eyes greedily glanced at the other party's graceful curves, and he showed a smile that he thought was handsome. The rest is to pay off the credits in the past. How about it? As I said, Danilo is a very trustworthy person. Simba, put the money away, I think it's dirty. The female owner of the bar leaned back on the chair, her voice not fluctuating at all. As ordered, master. Simba replied obediently, glanced at Danilo with contempt, and slapped a pair of small leather wings to put away the gold coins on the bar. Danilo, who didn't care, leaned against the bar, elegantly held the glass goblet, and gently sniffed the familiar taste in the wine glass, ready to enjoy the bitterness of this cup of memory. It's a taste from their far-flung hometown, and the only wine that perfectly restores the taste, and a sip, the familiar taste can bring back some bitter memories. Trouble, let it go. A low voice suddenly sounded beside Danilo. Danilo was startled and broke out in a cold sweat. As a wanderer, it is not clear when he was approached. If he was in an alley or in the wild, he might have turned into a cold corpse. So he immediately turned his head to look. What came into view was a young man with icy black eyes and long messy black hair. The long black hair was covered by the hood on the cloak, and only a few strands were floating on the delicate face, dangling. A black linen outfit and cloak seemed to blend in with the dimly lit bar room, and the long sword, compound longbow and quiver full of arrows were firmly fixed behind him, motionless. The quiver made of dire eagle feathers in the quiver was still stained with undried blood, silently telling something. Bang! Thorn! Danilo screamed when he saw this familiar scene. The glass goblet slipped from his palm, his handsome face became distorted, showing a look of fear, and his trembling legs moved backwards with difficulty. Danilo's startled breath caught the attention of the bar. When everyone saw the man in black next to Danilo, their faces became ugly. Time seemed to freeze at this moment, and it became deadly silent. Several players dressed as wanderers couldn't help it first. The dim bar room became their best cover, and the hazy figure quietly left. Uncle, who is this Thorn? A young man in a grey wizard's robe asked softly to the dwarf warrior sitting across from him with a curious expression on his tender face when he saw the changes in the crowd. "Little god, you just came out of the wizard tower today, you must remember that this kind of person can't be provoked, and if you see it, hide away." The dwarf warrior frowned, remembering a bad memory, and then deliberately said in a low voice. After he finished speaking, he drank the wine in the cup, wiped the wine stains on his beard, and put the damaged leather helmet on the table on his head that looked like withered yellow weeds. "Uncle, didn't I tell you, I'm going to call me Pardo in the future, why can't I provoke it?" Pardo retorted with dissatisfaction, and then asked curiously. He is a level 1 wizard who has just taken up his post in the wizard tower. After 2 years of living in the wizard tower, he believes blindly and confidently that under the mage, all living beings are equal. Thorn is a ranger. In this bar, which is only open to our players, every time he comes, there will be bloodshed. I witnessed it with my own eyes last month. Thorn killed more than a dozen players in the bar. If it wasn't for the city guards, it would be hard to imagine how it would end. It is said that this ranger was subdued by the city guards and put into an underground death row. He thought it was over, but he didn't expect to come out so quickly. The dwarf warrior got up and took a peek at the black figure at the bar, recalling what happened not long ago, which still made him shudder. Why do players make it difficult for players, although those people are indeed hateful, but they can't go back, they are just living here, why can't they get along well? He didn't understand. If it weren't for the protection of his only close relative in the game, he would have gone to Yuanshan Town, a free town established by players in the wilderness. The dwarf warrior put away his things and immediately gestured to Pardo in front of him. Numerous profound lessons made him understand that people who eat melons are also life-threatening. Pardo stretched out his head and glanced back curiously, carrying the robe that didn't fit well, and with his mind full of doubts, he trotted to keep up with the dwarf warrior and slipped away quietly. "Brother Thorn, oh no, Uncle Thorn, please forgive me, I will never dare again, I'm just a little bastard, just eat here and wait to die." In the face of the fear of death, Danilo didn't care about his elegant image, only to see him holding his head in his hands, kneeling on the ground in despair and begging for mercy. He didn't want to die yet. The elves he chose had a lifespan of at least 800 years, and he had just met a beautiful noble widow recently, which gave him hope for his future life. "I didn't come to you, get out." Thorn looked at Danilo who was lying on the ground begging for mercy, and the murderous intent flashed in his eyes, but he finally forcibly held back and said lightly, Yes. I'm going to get out." Danilo fled to the door like a madman, and he vowed never to come to this place again. "Ms. Andrina, it's been a long time." Thorn walked to the bar, lifted his hood, pulled his long hair behind his slightly pointed ears, and greeted the bar owner. "I'm doing business here, you'd better not mess around, or the dungeon that is covered with food will welcome you again." Andrina got up quickly, her icy tone mixed with sarcasm. The bar owner is a human woman with delicate facial features, eyebrows as slender as drawn, and long jet black hair draped over her back. Wearing a red evening dress to set off a slender figure, if matched with a little smile, it is definitely a warm and charming stunner. It's a pity that at this moment, her pretty face was frosty, and she was staring at Thorn with a bad look. Her eyes suddenly flashed with golden light, and violent magic fluctuations began to condense around her body, and the inconspicuous scale patterns on her skin gradually solidified. "Don't be nervous, I'm not malicious this time, just to meet someone." Thorn was stunned, then squeezed out a reluctant smile. After he finished speaking, he took off the wine bag around his waist and put it on the bar. "Dragon Bite's bitter wine to fill me up, thank you." Hearing this, Andrina was slightly relieved, and then gestured to Simba with her eyes. Simba hesitated for a moment, looked at Thorn in fear, and finally gathered up the courage to flap his wings and grab the wine bag and fly away quickly. "Dragon Vein Warlock." Thorn's eyes swept across the lines on Andrina's skin inadvertently, and he was a little surprised, so he asked casually. "That's right." Andrina nodded with a hint of surprise in her beautiful eyes. "Put away your spells, it's useless," said Thorn, shaking his head. "Do you want to try it?" Andrina raised her eyebrows, a hint of play flashed in her golden eyes, the violent magic fluctuations began to gather frantically again, and the glass on the bar began to shake uneasy, making a bang 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 sound. "Okay, if I win, I'll get rid of the drink money." Thorn was unmoved, he leaned in front of the bar and responded casually. "Then you lost." "Whatever, as long as you're happy." "Very good." Andrina spit out 2 words heavily, and the surrounding temperature began to rise gradually. Clang! The sound of the long sword being unsheathed. As soon as Andrina finished speaking, she saw a cold light flashing across her body, and then a coolness spread across her body on her neck covered with solid scales, followed by a burning pain in her neck. A trace of panic flashed in Andrina's beautiful eyes, so she quickly dissipated the magic fluctuations in a frustrating way, and looked at Thorn, just to see the action of Thorn's long sword being sheathed. "Words count." Thorn put away the long sword and said lightly. Andrina touched the blood on her neck, and then mocked with some reluctance, "The hand speed of being single for 20 years is really different." "No, it's 25 years. Thorn pondered for a moment and corrected with a serious look. After he finished speaking, he saw Simba flying over with a wine bag, and took it with his hand. Ignoring Simba's dissatisfied little eyes, he rubbed his head with his rough palm. "What a well-behaved little devil." Then he pulled out his hand to avoid the sting at Simba's tail to counterattack, and slapped the little devil who was grinning at him with a slap. Then he turned his head and glanced at Andrina. "Lend me the secret room, I want to see an old friend. Better to die in the arena tonight." Andrina stared at Thorn's figure disappearing into the depths of the bar, and after a while, muttered angrily. At this moment, Andrina suddenly felt that the wound on her neck was wrapped by a soft energy, and then healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. His expression changed, and he immediately looked up at the door in doubt. "Sister Lena, are you injured?" A gentle voice came from the door, and then walked in. "Nolan, why are you here?" Andrina narrowed her eyes when she saw the woman in front of her, and a reluctant smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. Fortunately, the guests were scared away by Thorn at this time, and Andrina looked at the empty bar and secretly rejoiced. "I'm here to find Thorn, is he here yet?" Nolan put away the silver holy emblem in his hand and asked. "He went to the secret room." Andrina gave the other party a complicated look, hesitated, and finally pointed to the direction where Thorn disappeared. Nolan didn't say much, thanked Andrina slightly, and immediately walked to the depths of the bar. "Hey, God gave you a pair of beautiful hands, but you choose to hold a sword, and give you a beautiful face, but you are blind." Andrina looked at the empty bar, then looked at Nolan's disappearing figure, and complained boringly. "Chamber of Secrets. This is a kind of establishment for the convenience of some discerning guests to clean up or talk about some confidential topics. In most noisy pubs or bars there will be such a facility. The composition of this kind of room is probably to cover the roof and 4 walls with double linen cloth sandwiched with cotton wool, and the floor is covered with a thick blanket. The tight-fitting door can only be locked from the inside, enough to prevent the most sensitive professionals from eavesdropping. Of course, the effect is still far worse than the magic circle arranged by the casters. After all, it is an existence that can easily block even prophecy spells." There was no light in the small dark room. Thorn, who likes quietness, sat silently on a chair, holding a small dagger in his hand, cutting an unformed arrow shaft. This is a special tree from the southern kingdom on the other side of the Sea of Brightness, Jedril arrow bamboo. As the name implies, it was born to make arrows. It is a very successful product of arcane experiments. It will also have a slight thunder damage when it grows enough years. It is rumored that the inventor, the wizard, Jedalal, almost exhausted the bamboo in the entire mountain forest near his residence, resulting in a barren land. For this reason, the natural wrath of the Druids was ushered in. A fuse triggered a 3-year-long war between wizards and Druids. Wizards focus on arcane research, Druids are committed to protecting the natural environment, they always like to pinch each other. This kind of arrow bamboo can reach a height of more than 100 meters. It not only inherits the tough and straight characteristics of ordinary bamboo, but also the most important thing is that it is solid. It is the best choice for making javelins and arrow shafts. In places where iron ore resources are scarce in the southern kingdom, even if metal arrows are not installed, this kind of arrow bamboo is still very lethal to unarmored soldiers and professionals. As a jackpot occupation, ranger. In addition to training excellent melee skills, Thorn must also have good shooting skills. Making arrows is one of the skills he has mastered. Arrows are a very particular thing, and many elements must be considered. For example, weight, length, sense of balance, etc., or you will lose your life if you are careless in this monster-infested world. Accidents are often accompanied by a lot of danger, facing danger, will be greeted with cold death. Therefore, in order to ensure the accuracy of his shooting, Thorn made all the arrows by himself, and his own use was the most convenient. In the eyes of an adventurer, full quality means mediocrity, but in this cruel world, specialization means that death is getting closer and closer to you. How much water a barrel can hold often depends on the shortest piece of wood. Tuck tuck tuck. At this moment, a slight knock on the door interrupted Thorn's movements. Thorn was stunned, then said, "Please come in." Crunch. Nolan gently pushed open the door of the secret room, and when she saw the room filled with darkness, she brushed up the strands of hair scattered on her face, and a trace of sadness flashed across her brows. I saw her stretch out her fingers and gently spit out a syllable. Hum. With a soft sound, a strong light erupted at her fingertips, instantly dispelling all the darkness in the room. Nolan stepped in and closed the door gently. Looking at the black figure and the familiar dress in front of him, Nolan sighed slightly, and the scene when the two fought side by side suddenly appeared in his mind. The kobold camps, the city sewers, the underground tombs, the dilapidated church of the evil gods, etc. flashed quickly. With a thought, the bright light on her fingertips slowly fell onto the unlit candle beside the table. Then he walked over and sat on the chair opposite Thorn. "Are you okay?" Nolan looked at Thorn complicatedly, and after a moment of silence, he spoke first. "Fortunately." Thorn stopped the movement in his hand and replied, then raised his head and glanced at the girl in front of him. A pair of big watery black eyes lit up under the curved eyebrows, and the long black hair that was casually scattered on the white and tender face, still so moving. Thorn looked a little lost, but quickly hidden it without a trace. "Do you have anything to do with me?" In order to hide the embarrassment, Thorn focused his attention on the already formed arrow shaft in his hand. After trying the balance, he put it away with satisfaction and asked with his head lowered. "This is the map you need, and I have collected it for you." Nolan took out a black cylindrical leather case and placed it in front of Thorn. Seeing the items on the table, Thorn looked startled, then glanced gratefully at the girl in front of him and said, "Thank you very much." The map of Toriel's world has always been what Thorn longed for. Unfortunately, these things are only possible in the temple. As an ordinary adventurer, it is too difficult to collect them. At first, he just mentioned it casually, but he never thought that the other party would always remember it in his heart. "Are you really planning to go to the Eastern Kingdom?" Nolan stared at Thorn's calm face, as if trying to find the final answer. "This is a promise and a belief to live." Thorn paused for a moment while holding the leather case, looked away from Nolan uncomfortably, and spat out these words slowly. "Commitment and belief." Nolan muttered in a low voice, refuting speechlessly, and then continued, "According to the ancient records of the temple, in the chaotic and turbulent times, the Silk Road leading to the continent of Kerata was the main battlefield of the Abyss demons, and there are still cracks in the bottomless abyss. All kinds of monsters breed, even the powerful forces such as the Silver Blade, the Fortress of Atonement and the Northern Expedition Army of the Dawn are only struggling to support it, and it is almost impossible to pass through. The Sea of Scars was blocked by the storm again, and all land and sea routes to Keritu had been blocked. No one knows the news about Keritu continent so far, and it may have been turned into ruins in the turbulent era. I hope you don't try to be brave when you are not strong enough, and it is also a good choice to live here well. Nolan looked at Thorn, who bowed his head and said nothing, and the inexplicable emotion in his eyes flashed away, and then told Thorn the information he had consulted in the temple. Destruction? Impossible, but I have my own measure. Thorn shook his head and whispered. He tightened the leather case holding the map in his hand. He naturally understood what Nolan said. He was not an impulsive and reckless man, and the interests were clearly distinguished. This is a platinum coin, a product of the Arcane Empire. Maybe it contains a surprise, and I gave it to you. Thorn took out an exquisite platinum coin, which was carved with a clear floating fortress, which shone a little bit. The eye-catching arcane aura, he put it in front of Nolan and said. Platinum coins once flourished for a period of time in ancient times. Many ancient empires have minted them, and today they can only be found in ancient treasures. Even though most people have never seen one in their life, it is sought after by many businessmen and nobles and has great collection value. Thorn understood that Nolan must have taken great care to collect so many maps, and he didn't want to owe anything. If you give Nolan money directly, Thorn knows that she will not accept it because of her personality, and this platinum coin is just right. It can be used as money in an emergency, and it is also a good collectible. Then I'm welcome. Nolan's eyes flashed with a chuckle, and he immediately put it away carefully. Actually, I asked you to come here today to say goodbye to you. I am planning to travel far, and it may be difficult to meet again in the future. After the two sat at the table in silence for a while, Nolan hesitated for a moment, and then spoke slowly. She is a paladin who has been inspired, and she also has her own persistent beliefs. Take care all the way. Thorn was not surprised when he heard the words, as if he had expected this result. Then, goodbye by fate. Nolan stood up and brushed his hair, pulling his long black hair behind him, and stretched out his right hand to whisper to Thorn. In a world full of deceitful wizards, evil priests, bloodthirsty dragons, and chaotic demons, the paladins are the last hope that never goes out. An ancient oath drives her determination for justice and devotion. Since the world has chosen her, she has to keep walking for her beliefs. Thorn got up and looked carefully at Nolan in front of him. Although he didn't have the allure of the country, he looked very beautiful. Under the soft light, his whole body exuded a faint dusty temperament, giving people a sense of tranquility. Then, good luck. Holding Nolan's right hand, Thorn stared at the other party's clear and flawless eyes, smiled slightly, and sincerely blessed. Watching the shadow of Nolan's departure gradually disappear in his eyes, Thorn leaned on the chair and looked at the roof with some bewildered eyes. After a long time, Thorn sighed heavily. Suddenly, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and the image of the moment when this strong girl became a paladin appeared in his mind. I feel the call and must answer, as always, live for honor and die for honor. The passion for the pursuit of perfection, the will to uphold the law, and the power to repel evil. The paladin is immortal, justice is immortal. Ding! Thorn opened the leather case holding the map, and suddenly a small item fell on the table with a crisp sound. Thorn looked at the ring on the table with a complicated look and picked it up gently. This is a silver-white ring set with a white crystal, and the crystal exudes a soft magic aura and bursts of warmth. Paladin's Ring of Friendship, type, jewelry quality, blue extraordinary restriction, not available for non-good alignments abilities, protect against evil, punish evil, note, justice will always guard our friendship. A gift from the Paladin Balazar before his departure. Winter City, a seaside city of the Free Federation. Thorn walked silently in the lower city next to the port, walking towards his destination. Xiakan district is the residence of the lower-level civilians. There are many houses with broken stone and rock roofs, some of which look crumbling, as if they will collapse at any time. A gust of breeze blew, and the cold wind from the Sea of Glory and the smell of moisture greedily permeated this backward urban area, causing pedestrians to tighten their thin clothes. Most of the civilians living nearby are ordinary people and some unfamiliar outsiders who have endured urban labor for a long time. Dock porters, sailors, far-flung adventurers, caravan escorts, and more. The camp of Winter City tends to be absolutely neutral, and it does not exclude any foreign races from entering and leaving, of course, provided that you do not cause trouble. There are all kinds of residents and adventurers on the streets, and various body shapes, appearances, skin colors and colorful costumes express the unique characteristics of each race. The tall dragonborn strode through the crowd in a hurry. In the shadow of the stone house not far away, a cunning tiefling rubbed his hands, with a wicked smile at the corners of his mouth, waving his tail, and a restless gaze flashed in his eyes. A group of dwarfs gathered around, laughing at an ingenious wooden toy that activated and moved on its own, celebrating the success of the effort. The smiling ogre carried a newly hunted warg on his shoulders, and walked through the street with a stench all over his body, and everyone avoided it with disgust. The goblin wizard with the grey pointed hat stood at the door with his hands on his hips, arguing loudly with the kobold warlock carrying a basket and holding a mining pick, and a group of melon-eaters gathered around and pointed. Rough dwarves, small and agile halflings, dusty half-elves, and drow elves who are far away from the sun, squatting in the corner with their arms and legs folded. In this prosperous port city, the number of players is surprisingly small. Except for those who died accidentally, most of them are concentrated in the poor and backward villages and towns in the wilderness. This is a cruel otherworld. The intrigue between nobles in the bustling big city, the conspiracy woven by the evil gods, the underground network of thieves' unions, the death list of the killer organization, etc., are filled in the seemingly prosperous shadowy corners. It is difficult for player forces to have a foothold here, and most of those who stay here are struggling to survive at the bottom. After countless lessons of blood and fire, these so-called sons of heaven finally realized their insignificance and no longer competed for this limited piece of cake in the city. Most players are far away from big cities, go to remote wilderness villages and towns, and compete with those evil intelligent races for limited living space. In Toriel's world, it is only there that they have the opportunity to emerge as their own elite template players. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. 1 year after the game was launched, it has been more than a year since all players traveled here. Most of the people who can adapt face the reality, and those who can't adapt slowly disappear from everyone's sight. Some people make ancient vows to purify all evil in this world, and some people just want to build their own territory and shelter for players to live the rest of their lives in peace. There are also some people who can't accept this cruel reality, and they take their precious lives hastily. Some people even choose evil sacrificial rituals in order to gain powerful power, and sell their souls to the demons of the abyss, the devils of hell. Humanity is fully displayed here. Thorn recited a sentence in his heart, and immediately rows of light blue data appeared in the retina: name, Thorn race, half-elf, wood elf blood, background, Fars Trider attributes, Constitution 14, Strength 15, Agility 20, +2, Intelligence 12, Wisdom 17, Charisma 12 Alignment, Chaotic Good Occupation, Level 10 Militia, Max, Level 4 Ranger, 020000, Health, 4646 EXP, 25035 Practice Point, 10523 Skill Points, none Attribute Points, none Racial Traits, Dark Vision, Elven Blood, Wild Mask, Keen Senses Class Skills, Stealth 13, Hide 15, Perception 14, Roll 15, Taunt 5, Heal 7, Concentration 11, Spellcraft 4, Knowledge, Nature, 7, Movement 9, Craft, Arrow making, 8 class traits, proficiency with simple and military weapons, weapon focus, longsword, weapon focus, longbow, wild empathy, animal companion favorite enemies, humanoids, gnolls, ogres, occupational feats, tracking, mastery, durability, 2-weapon combat, survival common feats, precision shot, alertness, mobility, dodge, quick shot personal expertise, athlete, tenacious, rolling attack martial arts, desert style LV1, 12420000, red lotus sword, enhancement technique, flame star, strike technique, fire avoidance technique, stance technique, soul of steel LV1, 3620000, clear body, stance skill, ranger magic, one ring, 44, hunter's mark, entanglement, resist energy damage. Looking at his attribute column, Thorn felt a little sad. This was the result of his 2 years of hard training and practice in the game. This world is not as good as imagined. In 2 years, the level has only been raised to level 4, which is already at the upper level in the player group. Compared with those tough spellcaster professions, it's not too good. Because most players who choose wizards, druids, and priests, because of the need to master a complex knowledge system, most of them have not succeeded in taking up jobs, which is real and cruel. It's time to wrap things up. Thorn sighed and glanced at the rundown residential area in the distance. Crunch! The rotting door seemed to turn into a pile of useless ruins afterwards. Thorn gently pushed it away and walked in. Bang bang bang! There was still the familiar sound of knocking in the courtyard, and Thorn's eyes turned to a hunched figure who kept beating against the stone. The old man who had been through vicissitudes of life had white temples, and his wrinkled face was dull and dull. His withered hands held a hammer and a chisel, respectively, and kept tapping against the stone in front of him, emitting bursts of sparks. But the outline of the stone still can't tell what it looks like. Any wine? An old voice echoed in Thorn's ears. Thorn immediately handed over the wine bag around his waist and said, "Dragon Bite Bitter Wine, a very special dark beer, would you like to try it?" Dragon Bite Bitter Wine, this special dark beer has a history of nearly 1,000 years. At the beginning, only the Dragon Bite Brewery could make this fine wine. The old man stopped the movements in his hands, the look of memory appeared in his cloudy eyes, but his hunched body seemed lonely. After finishing speaking, he took the wine bag in Thorn's hand, feeling the familiarity that he had not seen for a long time. Thorn stood still, looking at the old man in front of him while drinking and remembering the past. This is a mysterious old man who holds the ancient inheritance of 9 swords from the Kerita continent. And Thorn came to Winter City half a year ago. He was fortunate enough to get acquainted with the old man. After going through all kinds of difficult tests, he finally got his approval. Obtained part of the inheritance of the 9 swords. Now, Zhejian has mastered Steel Soul School and Desert Wind School, and the purpose of coming here today is to obtain the 3rd sword technique, Shadow Hand School. This is the key to his multitasking Sword of the Sage. At that time, there were 3 basic occupations of the 9 swords that appeared in front of him: the Sword of the Military Road, the Sword of Tiansu, and the Sword of the Sage. And after deliberating for a long time, he chose the Sword of the Sage. This profession belongs to a master of martial arts skills, a sword mage whose knowledge of the path to the highest can unlock all kinds of powerful abilities. These abilities are all supernatural in nature. Take it, young half-elf ranger, don't forget your promise. After the old man finished drinking, he took out a book with a black cover and handed it to Thorn. After speaking, he picked up his hammer and chisel again and continued to beat aimlessly at the stone in front of him, sparking sparks. Thorn took the book, and when he saw the 3 words of the quaint Shadow Hand School on the cover, this word was passed down from the Kerita continent, and he was fortunate enough to master it all. Bang bang bang! In the dilapidated stone house courtyard, there was only a dull sound of beating. Thorn looked at the old man's movements, was silent for a moment, then touched his chest with his left hand, bowed deeply to the old man in front of him, and turned away without hesitation. Searching for the lost continent of Keritu in the turbulent times, this is Thorn's promise to the old man in front of him. The old man's life, name, strength, origin. Thorn didn't know anything, the old man didn't want to mention it, and Thorn didn't want to ask. All he knew was the 3 ancient sword techniques from the Eastern Kingdom that the other party taught him. And what he needs to do is to find the lost empire in his lifetime. There are no restrictions, only a verbal promise, that's all. As the knocking sound gradually disappeared from Thorn's ears, Thorn's figure once again came to this dilapidated and busy downtown. Thorn looked up at the gloomy sky and the wizard tower that was more than 100 meters high, and said to himself, I must leave here tomorrow. The west of Winterfell faces the threat of the gnolls in the Great Swordscar Mountains, and both sides have accumulated hatred that has permeated the depths of their blood since the chaotic and turbulent years. Never die. In the southern port, the Sahuagins of the Sea of Glory are about to move. The only purpose of these devils from the deep sea is to turn Winter City into the waves of the sea. The Black Pearl Forest in the east is a group of hobgoblins managed by a militarized model. The ambitious hobgoblins have long forgotten how they lived under others' fences. They despicably tore up the covenant with Winter City, thinking about turning the prosperous Winter City into their Shura field all the time. Stormy Winter City. Can those nobles in Shangcheng really resist it? Thorn doesn't know, he only knows that before the city completely falls. Leave quickly. Damn it! You are actually alive! A rude-looking dwarf exclaimed when he saw the shadow appearing at the door, staring at 2 big silver-blue eyes. Then he put down the hammer in his hand, wiped the sweat on his forehead, picked up the pipe on the side, took a deep breath, opened his mouth and exhaled a string of fist-shaped smoke rings, finally calming down his excited heart. Brado has been gone for a long time. Have I finished everything I ordered? Thorn greeted with a smile while standing at the door looking at the excited expression of the dwarf. After he finished speaking, he entered the simple blacksmith shop next to the street in Xiakan district, and immediately felt a surge of heat coming towards him, in stark contrast to the cold sea breeze outside. The dwarf player Brado in front of him is a very skilled blacksmith, and Thorn's weapon attrition is done here. His chosen race is a standard shield dwarf or mountain dwarf. Due to the influence of iron and flames, his fair skin is gradually changing to a bronze color. Under a simple grey cloth, he is covered with strong muscles, and his brown hair and beard are casually because of some obstacles. In the world of Toriel, the shield dwarves are well-known craftsmen, best at processing metal and stone. They prefer to devote their energy to their craft rather than the flamboyant artwork and flashy gilding of their golden dwarf brothers. The work of shield dwarves is enduring, and they leave a personal and unique mark on their immortal masterpieces as a way of attaining eternity. And the player Brado is just like this. The purpose of entering the game was not to fight and kill and experience the exciting life of adventurers. This is an inextricable player who is obsessed with blacksmiths. 2 years of blacksmithing career have made him the best blacksmith in the lower part of Winter City. But the only pity is that he is not interested in magic runes, which is the fundamental reason why he has never been able to forge enchanted weapons. What a joke! How dare I neglect what you asked for, Thorn? Although I always thought you had died in a dark dungeon, Brado will still do what he promised. After the dwarf finished speaking, he immediately jumped off the stone platform beside the iron forge, walked to Thorn, raised his head and handed over the pipe in his hand. Come on, brother, to celebrate your new life, try the tobacco from the Northland halflings. I've worked so hard to get it, and these addictive things have cost me almost all of my savings. Thorn was not interested in tobacco, and shook his head in rejection. The tobacco in Brado's hands was brought by the merchants from the northern wasteland of Winterfell through the Neverwinter Sea, and was a specialty of the strong-hearted halflings who lived there. This kind of tobacco is basically rich and difficult to buy. Like tea from the mainland of Keritu, it is a good thing that many spellcasters are keen on. But unfortunately, the road to Keritu has disappeared, and the amount of tea leaves is no longer available. Tobacco made by halflings has a faint scent when lit, which can help spellcasters refresh their minds and make them enter a state of meditation faster. It is also a rare luxury in the aristocratic circle. But watching the rude dwarf in front of him enjoying this kind of thing, Thorn suddenly felt a waste of time, like a cow chewing a peony. It is hard to imagine that, as a dwarf who has been in the iron furnace all the year round, he never drinks alcohol. Since it's all done, take it out, I'm in a hurry. Then Thorn took out a dozen arrow shafts from the dimensional bag at his waist, put them on the stone table next to him, and sat on the stool to Brado. Tomorrow morning, he will leave Winter City as soon as possible, and Thorn still needs to prepare a lot of necessities for the long journey. Seeing that it is getting dark, he does not want to waste time. It seems that this dark dungeon has not worn away your impatient temper. I just heard Storm say that you are still alive, and I saw you in Andrina's bar with my own eyes. I don't quite believe it. While talking, Brado walked towards the shelf in the stone house, and then picked up a dusty wooden box. He blew lightly at the wooden box, and the dust filled the air, and then walked towards Thorn. Brado put the wooden box on the table, patted the dust on his clothes and beard, and said, "Did you know? Pardo, the little nephew of Storm's old dwarf, has successfully become a wizard, otherwise that stingy guy wouldn't have gone to the bar to celebrate, and then met you out of luck." Brado? Pardo? Thorn thought for a moment and finally remembered. Last month, when he was fighting with a bandit player in Andrina's small bar, he almost accidentally injured a dwarf player who likes to eat melons. It should be him. In the lower part of Winter City, there are not many players in the group, and the players who choose the dwarf race are even more numerous. After all, that height, everyone knows it. They are basically some melee players, relying on their good attribute panels, workers who do some cool work at the dock. Although he was a little tired, he could at least survive, unlike him who risked his life every day to fight with blood, and one day he might turn into a cold corpse. Thorn has probably guessed who Brado is talking about. As for the wizard players, he somewhat admired the perseverance of the other party. Before the accident in this game, the profession of wizard can be said to be avoided by many players. Because the Pardo that Brado just mentioned is a very ready-made example. It took 2 years to successfully inaugurate as a level 1 wizard, which really has no gaming experience. Although wizards are noble spellcaster professions, they are not as powerful as they imagined until they master spells above the 3rd level. Melee occupations can deal with 1 or 2 weak humanoids such as goblins and kobolds alone after training for at least about half a year. Working as a wizard for 2 years, is this playing a game? However, the accident a year ago made players realize that the game is actually playing all the players, and the players were all played by the game and were ruthlessly thrown into this dangerous world. Thorn gently opened the wooden box on the table, and a box of neatly arranged arrows appeared in front of him with a faint cold light. A complete arrow is composed of arrow, shaft, and feathers. Thorn can easily handle both the shaft and the feather, but he can't do anything about the arrow alone, so his arrows are custom-made here in Brado and then assembled by himself. Thorn picked up an arrow smeared with anti-rust grease, and after feeling the weight in the palm of his hand, nodded with satisfaction. So immediately picked up the arrow shaft and began to assemble. Armored arrow, abilities, Pierce +2, Armor Break +1, note, the arrows sharp enough to penetrate the armor, matched with the feathers of the Jedril arrow bamboo and the vicious eagle from the southern kingdom. The power and accuracy should not be underestimated. Thorn assembled all the arrows, put them all into the quiver, then took 10 gold coins from his pocket and put them on the table, and turned to leave. But when he was about to reach the door, he paused and turned around abruptly. Thorn looked at the busy shield dwarf Brado, and said solemnly, "Winter City is precarious, I advise you to leave as soon as possible." After speaking, he disappeared into the crowd outside the door without hesitation. In Winter City, Brado can be said to be a relatively good friend except for the girl, the paladin Nolan. Thorn's intuition told him that Winter City really couldn't stay any longer. So he gave Brado a wake-up call, and it was up to him whether the other party cared about it or not. Brado heard Thorn's advice, and the hand that was swinging the hammer stopped in midair, and finally put it down slowly. His rough face showed a rare sadness, and he muttered to himself, "After leaving here, where should I go?" Brado is a shield dwarf who is both grateful and sad for his wise choice. Because this race has a lifespan of nearly 400 years, after suffering torment, his only goal in life is to live plainly. The glorious guardian, the legendary wizard Kaladina, will surely protect this city of miracles that has survived the turbulent times. Brado muttered to himself when he saw the magnificent wizard tower outside the window. Because he remembered Pardo, who had just arrived with the old dwarf Storm. The young wizard was very talkative and told him a lot about the legendary wizard. Brado's silver blue eyes became firm, and the hammer in his hand became stronger. The night has come, and the dark sky is covered with dark clouds. This winter city, built at the junction of the outer sea and the inner sea, seems to be engulfed by a thick black fog. Thorn's necessities have been prepared for his long journey. At this time, he is walking alone on the dark street, heading for the last destination, the bloody arena. Suddenly Thorn felt a ray of light flickering around, and he looked up at the wizard tower with awe. A fist-sized bright light flashed at the top of the magnificent wizard tower, slowly spinning tirelessly around, as if escorting this bustling and noisy city. It is like a bright beacon for travelers and overseas ships to guide the way forward. Thorn, who once ventured in the wilderness, came to Winter City for this reason. However, the guiding function of this aura is just an accidental product, because the creator did not expect it to have the function of guiding the direction at the beginning. Its real name is Eye of Insight. Among the wizard's foraying prophecy spells is a reconnaissance spell called Secret Eye, and this Eye of Insight is like a super-enhanced version of Secret Eye. It is said that the Eye of Insight can observe the scene within a radius of 100 kilometers at the farthest, and then transmit its image back to the wizard's tower, and through the crystal ball connected to it, you can observe the surrounding changes. In addition to being unable to penetrate solid barriers, hallucinations, darkness, and dense fog are hard to keep out of its peeps. If it is a sunny day, because of the dazzling light, you can also find that there is a pillar of mithril above the Eye of Insight. Players will laugh when they see it and say, "Come on! Isn't that just a lightning rod?" The older residents in the city will close their eyes and think deeply, and then call it magic crystal cannon. But every time the wizards in the wizard tower mentioned it, they would look at it subconsciously in awe, and then proudly called magic crystal superconducting pulse cannon. This is a product of the Arcane Empire period. It is very powerful and can be attacked in all directions from the commanding heights. Even if the ancient dragon sees it, it will break open the portal with its tail between its tails and escape. The history of this wizard tower can be traced back to the beginning of Winter City, and it has accompanied Winter City from a humble town by the sea to its glory. The most chaotic and turbulent year has passed, or it can also be called the catastrophe of the saints. This has slowly developed into what it is today. It can be said that the wizard tower has made great contributions to the rise of the city and played a strategic deterrent role. Although the owner of the wizard tower has changed many times over time, it is still the most dangerous existence in the entire Corina Peninsula. It's a pity that I will be leaving tomorrow, otherwise I might be able to see the full power of the wizard tower in Winter City in times of crisis. Thorn sighed with regret. In the past, the small fight between the Winter City army and the gnolls was not worth the wizard's tower, even if the gnolls attacked the tower in the first 2 months. When the force was not very strong, only one large group, about 100, of constructive creatures was dispatched, the clay golem. But this time is different. Thorn, who has lived here for nearly half a year, can feel the tension brought by the war from the frequent mobilization of troops in the city every day. In particular, the port of Winter City is constantly transporting various military supplies every day. Players who make a living by loading, unloading and transporting at the dock can only be assigned to work for half a day at most. Now I can often work for a whole day until it gets dark, and my life is quite moist, and I can go to Andrina's bar for a drink every now and then. Can Winter City really get through the difficulties smoothly? Thorn couldn't help but wonder in his heart. Even a low-level adventurer could feel it. Thorn doesn't believe that the high-level people of Winter City can't feel the crisis from all directions. Either they have a plan, or they have already prepared a way out. But war is cruel, and there is only one life, and Thorn does not want to leave his fate in the hands of others and pray for those unknown results. Before the players had completely crossed over, a legendary battle took place in a city in the Southern Kingdom. A 9-ring spell, Meteor Burst. In an instant, a large number of melon-eating players standing on the city wall evaporated. This makes the players truly realize the horror of this world. Although the technology of this world is not high, it is a high magic world with extremely strong single destructive power. In the turbulent years, even those gods who were high above and looked down on all living beings have fallen a lot, not to mention these insignificant players. So Thorn doesn't want to get involved in this melee. The top of the wizard's tower. A pale blue light appeared on a portal made of a large number of precious gems and arcane materials. Immediately afterwards, a black shadow appeared, and when all the rays of light dissipated, the face of the figure was clearly revealed. With the help of the light of various flashing magic lights in the tower, it can be found that this is a middle-aged human man with vicissitudes of life. He was wearing a top-quality full-body armor that was as hard as his skin, and none of the black metal pieces connected to it were flat. A pair of curved spikes protrude from the arm position of the armor, and each connection is protected by a sharp triangular thorn, which shows that it is not only excellent in defense, but also more offensive. Rosalet, you interrupted a wizard's contemplation, which makes me very uncomfortable. The grey-robed wizard who sat cross-legged beside the crystal ball flickering with various sights said lightly. I'm really sorry. Wizard Kaladina, please don't be nervous. Rosalet said with a smile. Well, what's the matter? The wizard asked with a sigh. The situation is a little bad. We are going to be wrapped up tonight, old man. Rosalet said solemnly when he walked to the crystal ball. If you're just talking nonsense, then please go back. Kaladina said lightly, looking at the image in the crystal ball in front of him. Rosalet stopped talking when he heard the words, but observed the images that were constantly being transmitted in the crystal ball. The Knoll tribe in the wasteland that was approaching Winter City, the hobgoblin army walking out of the forest with various siege equipment, and the shadows that appeared from time to time on the coastline were all clearly displayed in front of the two of them. When Rosalet saw the circular arena in Winter City and the nobles cheering loudly on the seats, his eyes instantly turned cold, and a hint of sarcasm appeared on the corner of his mouth. Cheer to your heart's content, you will have a feast later. After speaking, Rosalet turned and walked to the window of the wizard tower. He looked down at the bustling Winter City and sighed, these are all left by the ancestors, I didn't expect that they will be lost from you and me. Ancestors often said, people make things happen, and things happen in heaven. We didn't do anything wrong, did we? Wizard Kaladina said lightly, still staring at the images that were constantly being transmitted by the crystal ball in front of him. The wizard tower will be handed over to you, Guardian of Glory. In times of crisis, all you need to do is to evacuate quickly without hesitation. After all, it is the hard work left by the ancestors and cannot be destroyed in the hands of those scumbags. After Rosalet finished speaking, he stepped into the teleportation formation without hesitation, and the figure quickly disappeared under the shroud of light blue light. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a heavy diamond golem stepped into the door and bowed his head to the wizard Karadna in front of him and said, Dear Master, the energy reserve has been charged. Very good. Kaladina's turbid eyes flashed brightly, and after pondering for a while, he said, Talling, report the situation of the wizard tower. As soon as Kaladina's voice fell, an illusory figure suddenly appeared in front of him and said with a mechanical voice, the wizard tower energy is ready. The energy reserve is recharged. The clay golem team. Stone Golems. Iron Golem Squad. On call. Magic Crystal Superconducting Pulse Cannon. Maintenance completed. Works fine. Half-elf in the distance. Don't try to get close, get out. The icy voice yelled at the hazy shadow in a dark corner. Is it still discovered? Thorn frowned and muttered to himself, then walked straight out of the corner of the shadow and walked towards the two guards guarding the gate. This is the junction of the upper and lower urban areas of Winter City. The fastest shortcut from the lower urban area to the upper urban area is the gate in front of you. Otherwise, you can only bypass the outer city where the poor live, and then pass through the business district. Because Shangcheng district belongs to the residential area of the nobles of Winter City, the luxurious and decadent nobles always like to look down on other residents below, and the gate in front of them is also to prevent the entry of idlers other than nobles. Anyone who does not travel with the nobles, does not serve with noble servants, and does not carry the noble's employment certificate will be blocked from the door. In order to test his stealth skills, Thorn always likes to turn on his stealth skills every time he comes here and walk slowly through the corners of the shadows. But what disappointed him was that every time he approached the two guards about 10 meters, he would be immediately reprimanded, which indirectly proved that the guards of the goal must be stronger than him. This is a real other world. Although players have the so-called attribute template and the function of killing monsters and upgrading, there is no magical reconnaissance technique. If you lose a skill, you will get most of the opponent's information. If you want to find out the opponent's strength, you can only rely on guessing and strong intuition, in addition to combat testing. In the wilderness, Thorn once encountered a kobold who was alone, and what he did not expect was that the other party turned out to be a kobold warlock. Then he was almost burned to death by the opponent's Facetophus flaming hand. Fortunately, he practiced the desert wind martial arts, and the fire avoidance art has a high resistance to flame damage, so he saved his life in embarrassment. At this time, Thorn was wearing a simple pure black linen clothes. All the items on his body, including weapons and equipment, were put into the dimension bag hidden by him. The actual space inside the bag is much larger than it looks on the outside. Although only the size of a palm, it can hold up to 50 pounds and a volume of no more than 5 cubic feet. And no matter what's in it, the dimensional bag always weighs 5 pounds. If used normally, because the surface has simple enchantments, it will not be damaged easily. But if it is vandalized, you can experience the fun of explosive equipment, and all the things in it will crash and fall to the ground happily. Thorn once fought with a low-level evil wizard in the wild. When attacking the opponent, he accidentally cut the wizard's dimension bag, and all kinds of strange things were scattered all over the ground in an instant. It made him experience the feeling of killing monsters for the first time, as if he had returned to the era of online games in his youth, but what followed was a dull pain in his heart. Because the dimensional bag sells for 200 gold coins in the wizard's arcane shop, which means that he indirectly damaged an item worth nearly 200 gold coins. Although the dimensional bag is very convenient for carrying items, don't put the weapon in it when you are about to fight. There is a certain delay in taking anything from the bag, which is why most spellcasters have many pockets sewn on the inside of their robes. Because the casting of many spells requires casting materials before mastering the feat of casting free materials. Therefore, Thorn's weapons are always carried with him unless there is an accident. Only in this way can he make various responses more quickly in battle. But today was different. The place he was going was the bloody arena at the junction of the lower city and the upper city. To keep the nobles entertained, gladiators in the arena were not allowed to wear armor and use enchanted weapons. Only in this way can the nobles with high eyes and eyes on the top of their heads clearly see the wounds and splashes of blood brought by the gladiators every time they fight. Show your identification. One of the guards saw Thorn coming, tightened the long sword in his hand, and then said coldly. Thorn didn't care much about this, so he took out a palm-sized metal plaque engraved with simple magic runes and handed it over. Gladiator of the Moraine family? Another guy who wants money and not his life. You can go in. The guard took over Thorn's identity card, and after seeing the family crest on it, he glanced at him unexpectedly, muttered, and then let it go. Thorn calmly took the sign and walked to one of the small doors on both sides of the gate. The gate is reserved for the so-called nobles who are called by the commoners, and the lowest level personnel are only allowed to pass through the small gate. In Toriel's world, all the rules are silently followed by people after many incidents, and Thorn naturally doesn't want to touch this bad head. As long as he can survive today, then he will quickly leave this place of right and wrong and go to a place that truly belongs to the players. That half-elf looked familiar just now. What's his name? One of the guards asked when he saw Thorn's disappearing back. It seems to be called Thorn. It turned out to be Thorn, it. How could I forget such an important thing? I would have known that I would not have exchanged guard positions with that guy Lando. The guard who asked the question suddenly said with some regret. Because the guard inside the arena could see the wonderful fight, he foolishly agreed to him for a little benefit from the other party. What's the situation? I can tell at a glance that you were transferred recently. Even Thorn doesn't know. This half-elf is not easy. He has won 98 consecutive victories in the arena, and it is very likely that the first one with 100 consecutive victories will be born tonight. Gladiator. I missed witnessing this historic moment. If a 100 GAME winning streak is so easy to get, it won't be that there hasn't been one until now. Another guard snorted coldly, pouring a basin of cold water in disdain. The Arena of Blood is a huge bowl-shaped pit whose walls are built into the shape of an auditorium. The flat area at the bottom of the bowl was specially provided for slaves, beasts, various monsters, and gladiators to fight. Usually every battle ends with the death of one of the parties. This is a place for many idle nobles in Winter City to vent and entertain. After all, there are really not many so-called entertainment activities in this world. Rather than an arena, it would be more appropriate to call it a gladiatorial arena or a coliseum. The so-called competition is just a decent name for nobles to make their faces brighter. The arena provides lively and interesting performances to the nobles, and they are not stingy with betting on their favorite objects. Even some nobles who can't see each other will send their own guards to kill each other, and then bet heavily on these games to win chips and benefits in various infighting. And Thorn was fortunate enough to come into contact here, precisely because last month in Andrina's bar while fighting with the bandit player. Due to the excessive movement, it attracted the attention of the city guards, and was then put in the underground death row of Winter City. So in order to survive and gain a free identity, Thorn successfully became a gladiator of the Moraine family. After he helped the Moraine family to complete 10 consecutive victories, he was finally released. However, Thorn fell in love with it deeply. The purpose of his coming here is to achieve 100 consecutive victories, and after completing it, he can also obtain a powerful background feat, Bloody Challenger. And tonight will be his last night in Winter City. Of course, he may turn into a cold corpse, and then be thrown into the sewers or fed some ferocious beasts. Nearly 2 years of adventures in the game made him have no fear of death, but that didn't mean he would die foolishly. Since he dares to come here, he naturally has the strength to rely on. Thorn was standing at the top of the bowl-shaped pit in the arena now, his tousled black hair lifted by the biting cold wind, silently watching the environment below and feeling the cheers of the audience in the seats. This is a habit of his. Every time before a duel, he will quietly observe a few battles. Only in this way can he better stimulate his blood. Under the illumination of the 4 ever-bright torches in the bowl-shaped pit, Thorn could clearly see the fight between the two beasts in the arena. In the field is a fight between a swamp bear from the Underdark and a bear goblin in the wilderness, but unfortunately, the battle is coming to an end. This swamp bear, who haunts all parts of the Underdark, is clearly superior. With the swoop of the swamp bear, it was over in an instant, biting the throat of the goblin bear who was immobilized due to a leg injury. The swamp bear opened his big mouth mixed with the fur and blood of the bear goblin, raised his head and roared angrily, as if to celebrate his victory. But the scarlet blood glow in its eyes showed that its purpose was not that simple. Sure enough, 4 swamp bearmen landed on the ground in an instant, and then jumped vigorously to the staff who were dragging the corpse of the bear goblin in the field. However, it is clear that this swamp bear man, who has not realized his status as a slave until now, is destined to be unable to succeed in its attack, and will only increase the suffering. With a mocking sneer from the groundskeeper, the swamp bearman soon got its irrational punishment. I saw a strong blue lightning flash from the collar on its neck, and the swamp bearman rolled and roared in pain while clutching his neck. In just a moment, the Zeddy bearman lay on the ground and twitched a few times in the torment of the lightning crackling, and then he stopped moving, and it seemed that he had fainted. Then he was dragged into the fence gate by the staff again. As a slave from the Underdark, the owner of the arena will not let them die easily until it has fully utilized its value. The only destination for this feral and ferocious beast is to be killed in the icy arena with the cheers of the nobles. Then the corpse was dragged away by the staff and fed to some unknown beasts to drain the last bit of its effect. After all the beasts and slaves that can be fought in the arena are all consumables, and it is difficult to satisfy those crazy nobles without a source of a large number of beasts and slaves. Although the ogres, trolls, gnolls, lizardmen and other humanoids are abundant in the Great Swordmark Mountains, they can fully meet the supply and demand of the arena in the roundup of various mercenary organizations. But if there are occasional beasts and slaves from the endless dark tunnel of the underground world, it will arouse the excitement of the nobles, and then make wild bets. Thorn was not surprised by the abnormality of the swamp bear just now, because this kind of thing always happens many times a day. Winter City is a city of freedom and a city full of sin, so it is difficult for the good gods destined to the world of Toril to gain a foothold here. In the words of these missionaries of the good gods, this is a city formed by a mob, they are all crazy, even the gods will not care for you. It is true that the hands of those who can survive in Winter City are not stained with a trace of blood. After all, this is a free sin city. The camp is absolutely neutral. Absolute neutrality is sometimes more terrifying than good and evil, because often at critical moments, you simply don't know which side they will favor, and who will suddenly be behind. At this time, the figure walking in the venue caught Thorn's attention. This is a strange monster. Seeing the other party for the first time, Thorn noticed something strange. The orcs of the world of Toril are very aggressive and generally belong to the evil and chaotic camp, and they often pillage, loot, and engage other creatures. And they have been feuding with elves and dwarves for centuries, usually fighting when they meet. It is said that in ancient times, the gods gathered to divide the world for their followers. Gruumsh, the chief of the orcs, declared that he had taken the mountain, only to find that it had been taken by the dwarves. Then he turned and declared that he had taken the forest, where the elves already lived. Gruumsh's 2 proclamations ended in failure, and he was mocked by the rest of the gods for nothing. Then Gruumsh roared furiously at all, and with his mighty spear he destroyed the mountains, burned the forests, and carved deep fissures in the earth. Since then, these races will fight each other as soon as they meet, and finally the orcs are driven to the barren land of the northern wasteland. Orcs have grey skin, rough hair, low foreheads, pig faces, and primitive humans with prominent lower canine teeth resembling wild boar tusks. Their natural occupation is barbarian, and some orcs even have the ability to rage right after birth. But the orc that appeared on the arena made Thorn feel that something was wrong. The orc was too quiet. Although he was wearing a filthy coarse cloth, it felt neat to wear, and his rough hair was tied into a ponytail and left behind. Holding a long sword in his hand, he walked to the center of the arena calmly, without the slightest fear of being a slave. I saw him stick the long sword on the ground, then sat cross-legged on the ground, eyes slightly closed, quietly wait for your opponent to come. Thorn the orc had seen a lot and killed a lot in the arena, and his first impression was dirty, savage, bloodthirsty, and crazy. So, this orc slave is most likely a player. Thorn guessed the identity of the other party with his own intuition. After a while, amid the protests of the nobles who were dissatisfied with their waiting, a thin figure stepped out again with the heavy sound of the fence gate. With long grey hair, dark skin, and bright red eyes, this is a male drow, and of course it can also be called a dark elf. In the Underdark, a drow group dominated by a matriarchal society, male drow elves generally have little status, and they are all kinds of tool people. In the early days of the game, many male players were attracted by the handsomeness of the drow race. But in the end, most of them couldn't bear the harsh environment and inferior status in the Underdark, so they deleted their accounts and retrained. I saw this male drow holding a long sword in each hand, occupying the other corner of the arena, crossing his swords, posing in a very strange defensive posture, staring coldly at the calm-faced orc. Is it the wandering swordsman? Or a drow swordsman master? Thorn thought for a moment, only to find two special occupations for male drow. Accompanied by the wild cheers of the nobles. The battle between the orcs from the northern wasteland and the drow of the Underdark is about to begin. In this tense atmosphere, a goblin standing in the center of the circular disc suddenly flew out of midair. Thorn is no stranger to this goblin, he is the commentator in the arena to bring the atmosphere to those nobles to make heavy bets. This goblin is a 3-road level wizard who is proficient in 1-level amplification and 2 end-level Tamsin floating disc. And the floating disc standing under his feet is formed by Tansen floating disc technique, which is very suitable for this kind of lightweight goblin to walk and hurry. The following two are the orc juggernaut from the northern wasteland and the drow swordsman master from the Underdark region. In the battle between swordsmanship, who is better? Let's wait and see. The voice of the goblin interpreter was very loud with the blessing of amplifying, and the standard lingua franca spread throughout the circular bowl pit. Juggernaut among orcs? A look of surprise flashed in Thorn's eyes, and there was actually a player who had successfully transferred to a juggernaut. Juggernaut is a melee profession specializing in mind, skill, body, and will. If you want to cultivate a sword, you must first cultivate your mind. In addition to barbarians, almost all melee occupations can be advanced. However, the conditions required are very harsh, and there must be a corresponding instructor for guidance and training. As the most powerful advanced class in the melee class, it also has a very obvious weakness, that is, it cannot wear any defensive armor, because this greatly affects their full play. Just like the wizard wearing heavy armor to cast spells is easy to interrupt the same reason. Thorn watched the upcoming duel with some anticipation. Start! With the loud voice of the goblin narrator, it did not imagine the life and death struggle between the orcs and the drow. In the arena, the orc juggernaut held a sword in one hand, stroked his chest with his left hand, and then slightly possessed the drow elf. Then he immediately put on a defensive posture, without the slightest move. In the face of the very polite greeting from the orc swordsman, the drow elf seemed to be insulted, and a trace of anger appeared on his face. But it was only fleeting, and the drow also kept a defensive posture and remained motionless. Obviously, the two master swordsmen are looking for the other's flaws, and then launch a fatal blow. At this time, the auditorium suddenly became silent, and all attention was attracted by the confrontation between the two. This is a battle of patience, and whoever reveals flaws first will suffer a fatal counterattack first. As a commentator of the arena, the goblin wizard obviously does not want the patient battle in front of him to continue, so he must bring the atmosphere into play. So there was a playful look in the eyes of the goblin flying in the air, and he saw that he stretched out his finger slightly, flashing a faint magic light. Bump! A roar similar to thunder suddenly exploded between the orc swordsman and the drow elves. When the orc swordsman heard the sound, he tightened the long sword in his hand, and a cold light flashed in his eyes, but he was unmoved. The drow elf's reaction was different. I saw him holding a long sword with a flickering cold light in each hand at the moment when the voice sounded, turning into a black shadow and attacking the orc swordsman. Roar! Clang! A roar full of power and a piercing symphony of gold and iron sounded at the same time. There is no gorgeous magic shining, and there is no powerful aura like a landslide, just a simple collision of two figures. Bump! Bang! Bang! When the collision was over, Thorn found that a trace of blood suddenly appeared on the neck of the drow, and then the blood stain gradually deepened until the head rolled to the ground with a dull sound. Immediately afterwards, the long sword in the left hand of the drow elf was also cut into 2 pieces and fell to the ground, while the long sword in the right hand was deeply inserted into the chest of the orc swordsman. However, because of the berserk ability that the orc suddenly launched, his body nearly 2 meters tall suddenly increased, and this sword stab was not fatal. This orc swordsman actually mastered the natural rage, and Thorn was slightly surprised when he saw the scene under the stage. Rage, Strength +4, Constitution +4, the orc swordsman was seriously injured, and the drow swordsman master died. Victory has been revealed. Under the thick night, gloomy black clouds over the winter city covered the whole sky, and it made people feel very depressing at first glance. But the arena at this time was extraordinarily lively, as if doing the last carnival. When Thorn slowly stepped into the middle of the blood-stained bowl, holding an arena-specific long sword and a short sword in each hand, the eyes of the nobles sitting in the auditorium lit up, and they started chattering. Just this small body? Still want to challenge for 100 consecutive victories? Unbelievable! What's wrong with the small body? The ogre is still lying down. What type of monsters will you meet today? It was a bloodthirsty owl-headed bear who was beheaded yesterday. Yo! Isn't this the young city lord Brant? If you don't go to defend the city, why are you still in the mood to hang out here? In the most conspicuous position of the audience, a handsome red-haired man leaned on a chair, crossed Erlang's legs, took a sip of the scarlet wine from a crystal goblet, and said casually when he saw the man in armor, "Mr. Vasilis, it seems that you are in high spirits today." The armored man took off the metal helmet and said with a faint smile on his resolute face. Then, he sat beside the red-haired man unceremoniously, picked up the wine bottle on the table, and unscrewed the cork to drink. "Winter City is guarded by the shining guardian Kaladina wizard and your father. I am always in a good mood." Vasilis glanced at the towering wizard tower and smiled indifferently. "Yes." Brant uttered 2 words in a strange tone, then threw away the empty wine bottle in his hand and fell to the ground with a crisp sound. "Mr. Brant, shouldn't you come here just to throw the wine bottle?" Vasilis still maintained a kind smile. "Who is the half-elf under the stage? It looks familiar." Brant didn't answer, but turned his attention to the arena. When he saw Thorn's back, he asked Vasilis, "Of course you are familiar. This is an outsider from the lower city, a wandering ranger. You caught the dungeon yourself last month." Vasilis stared at the wine glass in his hand and replied. It turned out to be him. Brant showed a glimpse, then his eyes flickered and said, "Mr. Vasilis, are you interested in taking a gamble?" "Oh? Of course I'm happy to accompany you." Vasilis's eyes narrowed slightly, and he glanced at Brant unexpectedly, and responded readily. Then he asked, "What are you betting on?" "I heard that your Moraine family has just recruited 2 high-level wizards. I would like to invite them to take a seat at the East City Gate. The gnomes there should be very welcome. I just don't know if the eldest young master of your family can be the master?" Brant said after some thought. When Vasilis heard the words, there was a hint of surprise in his eyes, and then he immediately returned to calm, and put his eyes on the crystal goblet in his hand for a moment of contemplation. "Of course there is no problem, but if I win, I need your full support. After all, my younger brothers are not the masters of Anfen. It is my pleasure to work with Mr. Vasilis." Brant responded happily. As a soldier on the front line, Brant is naturally very aware of how severe the situation in Winter City is now. Winterfell is an independent city of freedom, ostensibly ruled by his lord father Rosselt. However, the real economic control of the city is controlled by the 4 major families headed by the Moraine family. The 4 major families jointly contributed money, and the city lord forces used the money to maintain the army and were responsible for the guarding of Winter City. All business affairs within the city could not be interfered with. That is to say, as long as the 4 major families cut off their offerings, the army of Winter City will starve. However, the wizards in the Wizard Tower have always maintained their neutrality and never interfered with everything in the city except for the critical moment of Winter City. The current Winter City is surrounded by enemies on all sides, and the soldiers of the city have been fighting battles ahead. These nobles, headed by the 4 major families, have lived very comfortably under the protection of the city lord and the Wizarding Tower. With the continuous growth of financial resources, these nobles who started as businessmen finally set their sights on the location of the city lord's mansion. Watching the soldiers guarding the city wall continue to die tragically, the indifferent eyes of the nobles only have a desire for power. They foolishly thought that as long as the army of the city lord's mansion was exhausted, they could truly control the entire Winter City with their accumulated power. As for those invading foreign enemies, the nobles have full confidence in the wizards in the Wizard Tower, and feel that they can definitely resist it. After all, they were the demons who fought off the abyss. But Brant knew from his father's vague hints that the Wizard Tower was already preparing the coordinates of the teleportation across planes, and was ready to retreat at any time. So he wondered what the crisis was. Even the wizards couldn't handle it. And what he has to do now is to recover a little loss as much as possible, and quickly break through when the city is broken. Then how does Lord Brant plan to gamble? Vasilis's voice interrupted Brant's contemplation. It's very simple, I'll bet on that half-elf ranger to win this game. Brant replied, looking at Thorn's figure on the arena. He recalled the accidental encounter between the two in that remote small bar a month ago. Originally, after taking him away, he planned to lock him up for a few days to grind his anger, and then cultivate him as his own guard. But what he didn't expect was that he was taken one step ahead by the Moraine family and taken away as a gladiator. Moreover, winning or losing has nothing to lose to him. If he wins, he can get the help of 2 high-level wizards, and if he loses, it is nothing more than supporting Vasilis. Winter City is almost out of control. These nobles are still thinking about how to fight for power and profits. Maybe with the disappearance of the Wizard Tower, this place will soon be turned into ruins. Who cares about those things? It seems that you are very confident in this wanderer. Vasilis glanced at Brant unexpectedly. It's nothing, it's just pleasing to the eye, then it's up to you to choose the rest. I believe you are definitely not the kind of person who likes to break the rules. Brant said with a smile. I'm sorry, but you should simply investigate. This wanderer has won 98 consecutive victories, so according to the rules of the arena, his opponent must be carefully considered. Vasilis took a sip from the wine glass, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, as if he was already winning. Really? That's such a pity. Brant frowned slightly, pretending to be a little regretful. Go and notify, let the troll hunter out and play with the wandering ranger. Vasilis instructed the guards around him. Bloody arena. As the fence gate opened, Thorn, who was standing on the arena with half-squinted eyes, turned his gaze to the direction of the source of the sound. There were only the last 2 games left, and he didn't dare to be careless. Although the gladiatorial fights in the arena are basically carried out by 2 people with roughly the same strength. For the crushing battle, it is not what these recreational nobles want to see. Because only the splendid and fights such as remnants of blood, retaliation on the verge of death, perishing together, and reversal of adversity can arouse their heart-piercing cheers and cause them to go crazy. Just like the last duel between the Orc Juggernaut and the Drow Sword Master, it was originally thought to be an evenly matched battle. The long swords in the hands of both sides can keep fighting, but the result is beyond everyone's expectations. If it wasn't for the Goblin Wizard interfering with spells, the ghost would know when the 2 would stare at death. Even if the 2 sides started to fight, they were instantly counter-killed by the furious ability hidden by the Orc Swordsman. After all, Juggernaut itself is not a profession known for its gorgeous skills. However, the so-called strength is only superficial, you can't judge how deep the opponent is hiding. For Thorn, who has experienced a 9-8 GAME winning streak, it can be described as a deep understanding. Not only did he meet a very inconspicuous kobold, but it turned out to be a hidden dragon vein warlock. He also encountered an ogre nearly 3 meters tall and just entered the field, lying on the ground crying. So you should never pray for your own good luck, only believe in your own strength. Bang bang bang! A dull sound of footsteps entered Thorn's ears. Even though Thorn didn't have to look at it, he could roughly guess the size of his opponent with the keen characteristics of the half-elf race. From the opponent's steady pace, Thorn judged that the opponent belongs to the skill-based agility profession, and this kind of opponent is Thorn's toughest. Because he wins by relying on his flexible attack method, if he encounters an opponent with the same speed as his own, he will have no advantage at all. What he is fighting for is the real comprehensive strength and ability of both sides to play on the spot. So he tightened the weapon in his hand and slowly moved closer to the edge of the field, keeping a safe distance from the opponent. This is a troll. Seeing the ugly appearance of his opponent, Thorn recognized him at a glance. But seeing the troll dressed up, Thorn's face became even more solemn. Trolls are fearsome carnivorous humanoids in the wilds with a voracious appetite. Often alone, his favorite thing to do is to hide near human villages and small settlements, and hunt all the commoners until they run out of food. The average adult troll stands about 2.7 meters tall and weighs about 500 pounds. But the troll in front of him is only about 2 meters tall, which is definitely not caused by malnutrition. When a normal troll walks upright, because of his drooping shoulders, the upper body looks a bit hunched, causing them to walk very irregularly, and their arms will sway from side to side when running. The troll in front of him had a very straight waist, but the originally ugly and irregular limbs seemed reasonable. Under a grey linen coat, he was covered with a rubber-like greenish-grey skin, and in his eyes, which were covered by long iron-grey hair, the cunning of human nature far outweighed the wildness of animal nature. It was a troll raised by humans, and Thorn roughly guessed where the troll came from. Judging from the opponent's demeanor and temperament, he is not a player. When players meet, Thorn will have a feeling that is difficult to explain, just like recognizing the orc swordsman at a glance. The weapons in the hands of this troll were not heavy mace, or the like, but 2 light scimitars shining with cold light. It shows that the opponent likes to rely on skillful attacks to win. But what really caught Thorn's attention was the troll's terrifying ability to regenerate, and smashing the troll's bones or slashing his bast only annoyed him and made his troll burst into even more ferocity. The wounds of trolls heal very quickly. Even if their hands, feet, and even their heads are cut off, those dismembered parts will still maintain life activities, and the wounds will grow back. Only acid and fire can stop troll regeneration. When the two were ready, they were in the expectant gaze of many nobles in the audience. Start! The goblin wizard standing on the floating disc gave a cold drink and left quickly. The troll held 2 scimitars and rushed towards Thorn's position quickly. What a great speed! Thorn narrowed his eyes when he saw the troll approaching him at great speed. He took a deep breath, clenched the weapons in both hands, and prepared to attack Hedon. Clang! Clang! The 2 figures collided, and Thorn's right longsword quickly resisted the scimitar that the troll slashed at his head, while the troll's other scimitar slashed towards his abdomen was parried by Thorn's left-hand dagger. Live! Both of them have dual weapon combat expertise, and neither of them benefited much from this attack. However, as soon as the weapons of the 2 sides touched, Thorn immediately felt the tingling sensation in his arms and realized that his power was suppressed by the troll. So with the help of the troll's impact, he kicked the troll's abdomen and jumped back, and the 2 sides opened the distance again. The troll got the better of him, roared, and chased Thorn again. His attacks seemed to be haphazard, but each time he slashed in the deadly direction of Thorn. Through the first contact between the 2 sides, Thorn has roughly judged the strength of the troll, so he did not dare to take the opponent's attack hard. Instead, relying on the blessing of his 2 specialties, flexible movement and dodge, he quickly turned around and escaped the strong wind from the troll machete. Thorn was slightly startled, and then rolled directly on the spot, dodging the slash of another troll's machete again. As a thorn with a roll level of 15 and above and mastered the roll attack feat, his rolling action this time is not just to avoid attacks. Thorn, who was lying on the ground, suddenly inserted the short sword in his left hand into the ground, held the hilt tightly and used strength, and then the long sword in his right hand flashed a cold light, instantly hitting the unresponsive troll's leg, and blood spattered immediately. However, it is a pity that the long sword in Thorn's hand is not a fine product, and coupled with the attack on the ground, his lethality is not as impressive as he imagined. In this counterattack, the troll just cried out in pain, and then endured the pain. A fierce look flashed in his eyes, and the two machetes slashed at Thorn, who was lying on the ground at the same time. This is the troll's favorite tactic, to trade injury for injury. Feeling the strong wind brought by the machete, this kind of condescending attack, Thorn naturally would not be foolish to resist. He quickly pulled out the dagger that was inserted into the ground, and a lazy donkey rolled around. The ground was directly split into two ravines by the troll's machete. After getting away from the troll, Thorn stretched his legs up, and with his flexible body coordination, he got up instantly. Then I saw the troll not far away, and the wound on his leg was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a moment of effort, the wound of the troll just now was intact, leaving no trace. Looking at the troll not far away, Thorn did not act rashly. The troll is a humanoid creature with strong recovery ability. As long as you dare to take the initiative to attack, he will not dodge and evade, and then quickly counterattack. So Thorn didn't dare to take risks in order to save his stamina, because the troll's attack speed was also very fast, and he couldn't guarantee that he could dodge the opponent's attack every time as before. Don't think that he has the upper hand in the attack just now, and there will be a possibility of victory. The troll can resist with his powerful recovery ability. But Thorn only needs to be hit by the machete once. With the fragile body of his half-elf race, even if he is not killed immediately, he will not be able to escape the opponent's next counterattack. That is to say, this agile troll has completely suppressed his advantage, and it is very unfavorable for him to drag it to the end. It seems that if you want to kill the opponent without injury, you can only use that trick, Thorn thought to himself as he looked at the very tricky troll in front of him. His goal today is to complete the challenge of 100 consecutive victories, so it is destined that this game must save most of his physical strength and not consume too much and get injured. Otherwise, the next game will be even more difficult. If he fails, his efforts in the past month will be in vain, and he will lose his life as a result. After all, in the arena, only the victor can get out alive. What? The troll roared and charged at Thorn again, wielding two machetes. At this time, Thorn's face was very dignified. Looking at the swift figure of the troll, the short sword in his left hand began to tremble slightly. Clang! The machete and the long sword collided again, wiping out a faint spark and making a harsh sound, and then immediately found the gap where the machete and the long sword broke open at the same time. At the moment when the two weapons collided, the short sword in Thorn's left hand was suddenly wrapped in flames. Desert Wind Faction, Strike Skill Flame Star. Thorn threw the dagger in his left hand to the face of the troll, and the flames wrapped around the dagger instantly burst into a dazzling flash. The troll, who was caught off guard, only felt a dazzling white light suddenly appearing in front of him, his eyes stinging for a while, and his eyes were suddenly white, as if he was in a thick fog. Seeing a successful strike, the troll at this time had been blinded by the strong light, and Thorn immediately dodged and appeared behind the troll. Then he clenched the long sword with both hands, only to see the long sword trembling slightly, and suddenly a burning flame burst out. Desert Wind Sect, Enhanced Skill Sword of Red Lotus. Go to hell! Thorn gave a loud shout, and then jumped up with his legs. Puff! I saw the long sword burning with flames in his hand, flashing bright red light in the arena covered by the night, and with the help of a powerful impact from a commanding height, the sword chopped off the head of the troll, who was in a panic. A burning stench and smoke billowed from the troll's neck. Seeing the direction in which the troll's head was rolling, Thorn immediately chased after it, and then stared at the troll's head that had not lost its vitality and was still roaring, and smashed it with one foot. The troll's head was crushed by Thorn, and his neck also lost his powerful regeneration ability after being attacked by fire damage. In front of him, this troll who has no head and can only helplessly wield a machete is a lamb to be slaughtered in front of Thorn, without any threat. The target is dead. Extract the target's soul energy and gain 700 experience points. Through the perception of battle, you get 100 practice points. In the arena, Thorn's battle with trolls ended with the dismemberment of trolls and the cheers of nobles. At this time, Thorn was sitting cross-legged in a cold and damp dark room inside the fence gate, and was about to prepare for the final battle. In the dark hut, several fist-sized mice greedily licked the unknown blood and minced meat on the ground and slipped away quietly. Thorn raised his right arm, which seemed to have lost consciousness, with some difficulty, and then slowly kneaded his left hand to unclog his muscles and bones. This method of activating the muscles and bones was learned from a player who is proficient in massage. It turns out that this simple massage technique is really very useful. In a battle with a troll, although he did not seem to have suffered substantial damage, the troll's strength was close to 18 points or more. The huge shock force generated by the collision of the two weapons was completely absorbed by Thorn. His right arm, in particular, suffered the most damage. Now that the battle is over, when Thorn's tense expression relaxes, all the pain hits his body. However, this kind of encounter is not the first time, so Thorn is also handy to deal with. After all, half-elves are not a race with high strength attributes. What's more, when he created the panel, he adjusted the elf blood to the human blood. For the battle just now, if it wasn't for Thorn's tenacious expertise, he would have had a very hard time dealing with it. Stubbornness, personal expertise. The stubbornness in your character makes it difficult for you to be shaken in the things you decide. The strength of your will allows you to temporarily forget the pain and inconvenience caused by the wound, no matter what battle you are injured in, and even if your head is hit hard, you can still keep your mind clear. In this different world, professional expertise is the easiest for players to obtain. As long as it is upgraded and meets the level requirements, it will be automatically obtained. It is a good golden finger for players. But general expertise is not so easy. The easiest way is to go through the training method pointed out by the instructor, and then practice over time until you get the expert information prompt. Then you need to pay enough practice points to fully master it. However, there is no pattern to be found in personal expertise. To put it simply, it depends on personal talent. Thorn's tenacious specialty is that he accidentally mastered it by an inadvertent blow to the head, and the athlete also suddenly realized it through an unconscious running. But the same method is not necessarily universal for other players. Athlete, personal expertise. You are a natural athlete, and you are often more efficient than others when you run, climb, jump, swim, and more. Crunch. Thorn, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground to rest, was suddenly interrupted by the sound of a door opening, so he immediately looked up at the light at the door. It's him? Thorn raised his eyebrows when he saw the figure in front of him, and said with some doubts in his heart. Standing in front of Thorn was a young man, wearing a dark black armor stained with dried blood, holding a helmet covered with scars in his left hand, looking at him with a half-smile. Thorn was still quite impressed by the young man in front of him. A month ago, he was fighting a group of bandit players in Andrina's small bar. It was this man who subdued Thorn in an instant without any reaction, and was then put into an underground death row by the city guards. He is the son of the Lord of Winterfell, Brant Ironhand. Although Thorn was a little confused about this person's visit, he didn't ask more, but chose to remain silent and sit still. Are you Thorn? Brant asked directly. Exactly. Thorn replied lightly. Lucky half-elf, your ability has been recognized by me, you can now follow me and leave this disgusting place. Seeing Thorn's unchanged expression, Brant nodded secretly. When he met him in that remote tavern, he was attracted by his calm and unyielding character. Brandt believes that this kind of person will definitely become his right-hand man with a little guidance and training in the future. I am very grateful for your excellency Brandt's favor. Unfortunately, I am a guardian of the wilderness, so I can only regret it. Thorn was stunned for a while, then he slowly shook his head after deliberation. Road. It is not very new that slaves in the arena are favored by nobles as guards because of their outstanding performance. But Thorn was already free, and he didn't want to spend any more time in Winterfell. Originally, the purpose of his coming here was for the inheritance of the 9 swords. Now that the purpose has been achieved, he naturally wants to leave as soon as possible, and then go to the territory that truly belongs to the players. From the fact that Winter City can receive unlimited fugitives and cultists from all over the world, it can be seen that the rulers of Winter City have no good stubbornness. A city where even the good gods would not come here, Thorn didn't think there was anything here to attract him. So Thorn didn't want to join the forces of Winter City, so he could only try to refuse, and then make plans to see how the other party reacts. His profession is a ranger, and a ranger is an adventurer dedicated to guarding the wilderness, and their mission is to fend off the monsters and humanoid tribes that come from the wilderness, lest civilization be destroyed. Thorn isn't lying either, because that's exactly what he's going for. If Brandt in front of him had a little bit of so-called conscience in his heart, then he should understand what Thorn meant instead of embarrassing him. Besides, this Brandt's impression on Thorn was not so bad. Really? That's such a pity. May the of nature be with you, half-elf warrior from the wilderness. Brandt heard the words, a look of regret flashed in his eyes, then took out a small bottle of potion and threw it to Thorn, then turned and left. Intermediate Vitality Potion Special Effect, restore 30% physical strength after use. May Winter City be immortal. Thorn took the potion thrown by Brandt, and immediately got up and whispered to Brandt's back. Brandt, who walked outside the door, heard Thorn's voice, and his body froze, then put on his helmet and left quickly. In this sinful city, there are rare people in power who retain their conscience. Thorn sighed, then drank half of the potion in his hand, and then plugged the cork to save it. As the potion gradually worked, Thorn suddenly felt that his tired body was rejuvenating, and the faint pain in his arm disappeared completely. Now that his physical strength has recovered, there is no need to waste time here. Thorn stood in the same place and pondered for a while, and then immediately walked towards the door. In the dim corridor, the only source of light was the torches on both sides of the wall, but for Thorn, who had dark vision, he could still see clearly in this low-light environment. All kinds of ferocious beasts and slaves from all over the continent were imprisoned on both sides of the corridor. Some of them slammed into the fence frantically, and some of them leaned against the wall in silence and their faces were ashen. At this time, 2 figures appeared in the corridor passage. As the 2 sides continued to approach, Thorn could see the face of the other side. An arena guard was walking forward with an orc at the moment. Another player orc. Thorn glanced at it, and immediately recognized the identity of the other party. Then he looked around subconsciously, and found that the surrounding iron cages held many orcs from the northern wasteland. Most of these orcs' eyes were calm, as if they were about to face death, only a small number of them hid in corners and sobbed secretly. What the happened to the Northland wasteland? Why so many orc slaves? Looking at the orcs detained around, Thorn's expression changed, and there were at least 300 orcs. And it can be found from their expressions that the player orcs should occupy the majority. Bump! Suddenly, Thorn was slammed by a tall figure, and then Thorn staggered back a few steps. So Thorn immediately tightened his right hand, glanced at the other party with a strange expression, and left quickly. Walking out of the dark corridor, Thorn immediately took out a small rag that the other party handed over to him when he passed by the orc. It was a rag torn from the corner of his clothes, with real-world words written in blood. Although it has become blurred, it is still recognized by Thorn. Frostwolf SOS. It is the cry for help from the Frostwolf clan. Seeing these words, Thorn thought for a while, and immediately understood the meaning. Then I recalled a fairly sensational event on the forum when the game was launched less than 2 months ago. That is, there is an orc player named San, who can't bear the evil deeds of the orcs in the world of Toril and the hostility of other races to him. He set a grand ambition to completely change the views of various races on orcs and develop the orcs into a good camp. So he formed an orc tribe and became the chief of the orcs, and their tribe name was Frostwolf Clan. After seeing this call, many nostalgic players seem to recall a sentence from a certain game in their boyhood, for the tribe. In an instant, the blood is surging and the passion is surging. Those players looking for feelings deleted their accounts one after another and chose the orc race to join this great cause. As for what they would become in the future, Thorn didn't pay attention, but what he didn't expect was that they all became slaves to the arena. It's incredible. Unfortunately, I really can't do anything. Thorn looked at the slap-sized rag in his hand, but suddenly felt extremely heavy. This was a helpless cry from a desperate player. Now he, in this cruel different world, is not enough to protect himself, so what can he do to save others? Moreover, Winter City is also a free and sinful city, and professionals who want to incite some lawful good campers to launch slave uprisings cannot find suitable candidates.